On her wedding day, her dog blocked her path. Then she discovered the heartbreaking reason. Sarah Matthews stood before the full-length mirror in her childhood bedroom, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. The ivory wedding dress she'd dreamed of since she was a little girl hugged her figure perfectly, and her auburn hair was elegantly styled in loose waves beneath her veil. Everything was perfect, exactly as she'd planned for the past 18 months. Well, almost everything. Her beloved German shepherd, Max, lay at her feet, his chin resting on his paws, amber eyes watching her every move with an intensity that seemed different from his usual protective gaze. At 13 years old, he'd been her constant companion through high school, college, and now into her adult life. She'd rescued him when he was just a scraggly 8-month-old pup from the local shelter in their small Connecticut town, and he'd rescued her right back in more ways than she could count. "What do you think, buddy?" Sarah turned slightly, admiring how the lace detail caught the morning light streaming through her bedroom window. "Is Michael a keeper?" At the mention of her fiancé's name, Max's ears twitched, but he remained unusually still. Typically, he'd bound to his feet at any mention of Michael, whom he'd grown to love over the past 3 years. Today, though, something was off. Sarah's mother, Elizabeth, poked her head into the room. "Sweetheart, the makeup artist is here. Are you ready?" "Coming, Mom." Sarah gave herself one last look in the mirror, then reached down to scratch behind Max's ears. "Come on, boy. Let's go make me a bride." Max stood slowly, his joints creaking slightly with age. Sarah felt a familiar pang in her heart. He wasn't the sprightly young dog he used to be, but he was still her best friend. She'd insisted he be part of the wedding ceremony, much to her mother's initial protests. Michael, understanding how much Max meant to her, had readily agreed. They'd even gotten him a special collar with a tiny bow tie for the occasion. The next 2 hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. The house filled with bridesmaids in pale blue dresses, the excited chatter of hair and makeup artists, and the clicking of Sarah's mother's heels as she coordinated with the wedding planner. Through it all, Max stayed close to Sarah, more subdued than usual. "Is he feeling okay?" Jenny, Sarah's maid of honor and best friend since middle school, asked as they prepared to leave for the church. "He seems a little off today." Sarah frowned slightly, reaching down to run her hand along Max's back. "I think he's just picking up on all the excitement. You know how sensitive he can be." But deep down, she knew it was more than that. Max had been different for the past few days, eating less, moving more slowly, spending more time sleeping. She'd meant to take him to the vet, but with the last-minute wedding preparations, "We should get going," Elizabeth announced, checking her watch. "The photographer wants to get some shots before the ceremony, and traffic might be heavy." Sarah nodded, gathering her skirts. "Come on, Max, time to go." The drive to the historic St. Patrick's Church was short, but Sarah's stomach was in knots the entire way. Not from wedding jitters, she had no doubts about Michael, but from worry about Max. He'd been unusually clingy during the car ride, resting his head on her lap despite usually being well-behaved in the car. They arrived at the church with an hour to spare before the ceremony. The photographer was already setting up in the church garden, taking advantage of the perfect late September weather. Golden sunlight filtered through the changing leaves, creating a magical atmosphere that was exactly what Sarah had hoped for. "Let's get some shots of the bride alone first," the photographer suggested, positioning Sarah near a beautiful old oak tree. "Then we'll bring in the wedding party." Max, who had been sitting quietly beside Sarah's father, suddenly got to his feet. Before anyone could react, he walked over to Sarah and planted himself firmly in front of her, blocking the photographer's view. "Max, move aside, buddy," Sarah said gently, trying to guide him away. But Max wouldn't budge. He wasn't growling or showing any signs of aggression. He simply stood there, his body pressed against her legs, looking up at her with those soulful eyes. "Max, come here, boy," Sarah's father called, patting his leg. "Nothing. Maybe he needs to go for a walk?" Jenny suggested, reaching for his leash. But when Jenny approached, Max only pressed closer to Sarah, nearly causing her to lose her balance. "Max, what's wrong?" Sarah knelt down, wedding dress and all, to look into his eyes. That's when she noticed something she hadn't before. His breathing was slightly labored, and there was a tremor in his legs that hadn't been there earlier. "Sarah, we need to get these photos done," her mother said, a note of frustration creeping into her voice. "The guests will be arriving soon." But Sarah barely heard her. She was focused entirely on Max, who had now laid his head on her shoulder, something he did when he wasn't feeling well and needed comfort. His body was warm, too warm, against hers. "Something's wrong," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "He's not okay." Jenny knelt beside them, placing a gentle hand on Max's side. "His heart is racing." Sarah's father stepped closer, concern etched on his face. "Should we call the vet?" "But the wedding," Elizabeth began, then fell silent at the look on her daughter's face. Sarah was already pulling out her phone, dialing Dr. Peterson, who had been Max's vet since she'd first adopted him. Her hands shook as she pressed the phone to her ear. "Dr. Peterson's emergency line, this is Kate speaking." "Kate, it's Sarah Matthews. Something's wrong with Max. He's having trouble breathing, his heart is racing, and he's acting very strange. Please, I need help." There was a pause on the other end. "Sarah, aren't you getting married today?" "Yes, but," Sarah's voice caught. "Please, bring him in right away. Dr. Peterson is here doing paperwork. He'll see Max immediately." Sarah looked up at the small crowd gathered around her. Her parents, Jenny, the photographer, the wedding planner who was now speaking urgently into her headset. Finally, her eyes met her father's. "Dad, go," he said firmly. "I'll call Michael and explain. Jenny can drive you." "But," Sarah Matthews, her father said, using the tone that had always meant business when she was growing up. "That dog has been by your side through everything. Through your first heartbreak, through college finals, through your grandmother's passing. He was there when you met Michael, and he's been there every step of the way. You don't abandon family when they need you." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she hugged her father. "Thank you." Everything moved quickly after that. Jenny helped Sarah gather her skirts and led her to her car, while Max followed slowly, still pressing against Sarah's legs whenever possible. Sarah's mother, after a moment's hesitation, jumped into action, announcing she would handle the guests and asking the wedding planner to contact the reception venue. The drive to the veterinary clinic was tense. Sarah sat in the back with Max's head in her lap, her wedding dress spread around them like a cloud. She kept one hand on his chest, monitoring his breathing, while the other stroked his graying muzzle. "Remember when you first got him?" Jenny asked, clearly trying to distract her. "He was such a handful." Despite her worry, Sarah smiled slightly. "He ate my favorite shoes the first week, and my mom's garden gloves, and that awful hat my aunt gave me for Christmas. The one with the plastic fruits on it? He did you a favor there." They arrived at the clinic in record time. Dr. Peterson was waiting at the door, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of Sarah in her wedding dress, but saying nothing as he helped Max inside. The examination seemed to take forever. Sarah paced the small room, her dress rustling with each turn, while Jenny sat quietly in a chair, occasionally checking her phone and updating the others. Finally, Dr. Peterson returned, his face grave. "Sarah, please sit down." Those words, the ones no pet owner ever wants to hear, made her knees weak. Jenny was immediately at her side, helping her to a chair. "Max has developed a cardiac condition," Dr. Peterson explained gently. "From the tests we've just run, it appears he's in the early stages of heart failure. The stress and excitement of today likely exacerbated his symptoms." Sarah felt as though all the air had been sucked from the room. "But he was fine just a few days ago." These conditions can progress rapidly, especially in older dogs. The fact that he's 13, well, he's already exceeded the average lifespan for his breed. He's been trying to tell you something was wrong the only way he knew how. "By not leaving my side," Sarah whispered, understanding dawning. "By blocking me from walking away." Dr. Peterson nodded. "Dogs are incredibly intuitive. He knew he needed help, and you're the one he trusts most in the world. What can we do? We can start him on medication right away. It won't cure the condition, but it can help manage the symptoms and make him more comfortable. However, Sarah..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Given his age and the severity of the condition, we're likely looking at months rather than years." Sarah felt the tears she'd been holding back finally spill over. Jenny squeezed her hand tightly. "I need to stay with him," Sarah said firmly. "Sarah," Jenny began gently. "No, you don't understand. When I adopted Max, I made him a promise. I promised him he would never be alone when he needed me. I promised to always be there for him, just like he's always been there for me." She looked down at her wedding dress, then back at Dr. Peterson. "Can you start the treatment now?" The next hour was a blur of activity. Dr. Peterson administered the first round of medication while explaining the treatment plan in detail. Sarah sat on the floor next to Max's bed, her wedding dress spread around her like a protective cocoon, listening intently and taking notes on her phone. Meanwhile, the outside world continued to spin. Jenny coordinated with Sarah's parents and Michael's family. The guests at the church were informed of a family emergency, and the reception was postponed. And Michael, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from him. How is he? She'd been so focused on Max that she hadn't even thought about how Michael would react to all this. With trembling fingers, she typed, "Not good. Heart failure. I'm so sorry about the wedding." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, "Don't apologize. I'm on my way." 20 minutes later, the clinic door opened, and Michael walked in. Still in his tuxedo, his best man Kevin right behind him. Sarah looked up from her place beside Max. Makeup streaked with tears, hair falling out of its careful arrangement, wedding dress wrinkled beyond repair. "I'm so sorry," she began, but Michael was already crossing the room, kneeling beside her on the floor. "Hey," he said softly, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Remember what I said when I proposed? I said I wanted to marry you because you have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met. Because you love deeply and without reservation. How could I be angry at you for proving that?" Fresh tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks as she leaned into him. "But the wedding can wait," Michael said firmly. "All those people, the fancy venue, the perfectly planned timeline, none of that matters. What matters is that we're together, all of us." He reached out to scratch behind Max's ears, and the old dog's tail thumped weakly against the floor. "Actually," Kevin spoke up from where he stood with Jenny, "we might have an idea about that." Jenny nodded enthusiastically. "We've been making some calls. The minister said he'd be happy to come here. Your parents are on board. It wouldn't be the wedding you planned, but we could get married here?" Sarah looked around the examination room, then down at Max, who was watching her with those same loving eyes that had won her heart 13 years ago. "Really?" "Only if you want to," Michael said. "We can also wait, reschedule everything." "No," Sarah interrupted, a watery smile spreading across her face. "This is perfect. Max has been there for every important moment in our relationship. He was there when we met at the park, there for our first date, there when you proposed. He should be here for this too." And so, 2 hours later, Sarah Matthews married Michael Anderson in the waiting room of Riverside Veterinary Clinic. Her dress was wrinkled, her makeup hastily repaired by Jenny, her hair falling in natural waves around her shoulders. Michael's tuxedo was slightly rumpled from sitting on the floor. Their parents, the minister, Jenny, and Kevin were the only guests. And Max, wearing his bow tie collar and sporting a new 4-port in his leg, lay contentedly at their feet as they exchanged their vows. Dr. Peterson and his staff watched from the doorway, discreetly wiping away tears as the minister pronounced them husband and wife. When Michael kissed the bride, Max managed to lift his head and give a single, quiet woof of approval, making everyone laugh through their tears. That evening, instead of dancing at their reception, Sarah and Michael sat on the floor of their apartment with Max between them, sharing takeout Chinese food while still in their wedding clothes. They took turns feeding him small bites of plain chicken that Dr. Peterson had approved. "You know," Michael said, watching as Max gently took a piece of chicken from Sarah's fingers, "when I first met you two at the park that day, I knew Max was part of the package deal. I just didn't realize he'd end up teaching me so much about love." Sarah looked at her new husband curiously. "What do you mean?" "Well, look at today. You had this perfect wedding planned. Everything exactly the way you dreamed it. But the moment Max needed you, none of that mattered. You didn't even hesitate. That's real love. The kind that doesn't count the cost. That shows up no matter what. The kind I want our marriage to be built on." Sarah leaned over to kiss him, careful not to disturb Max, who had drifted off to sleep between them. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from the best," Michael smiled, nodding at Max. "He's been showing us how to love unconditionally all along." The months that followed were both precious and difficult. Max had good days and bad days. The medications helped, but they couldn't stop the inevitable progression of his condition. Sarah and Michael adjusted their lives around his needs, taking turns staying home with him when he was too tired to be alone, celebrating the good days with short walks in the park where they'd first met, and comforting him through the harder ones. Through it all, Max maintained his gentle, loving spirit. He still greeted them at the door when they came home, even if he could only wag his tail instead of jumping up. He still insisted on sleeping next to their bed, still begged for treats with those soulful eyes, and still showed his love in countless small ways. On a quiet evening in early spring, almost 6 months after the wedding, Max let them know it was time. He'd had a good day. He'd eaten well, enjoyed some sunshine in the backyard, and even played gently with his favorite toy. But as night fell, he became restless, moving from Sarah to Michael and back again, as if making sure they were both there. They called Dr. Peterson, who came to the house. In their living room, with Max's head cradled in Sarah's lap and Michael's strong hands stroking his back, they said goodbye to the faithful friend who had given them so much. "Thank you," Sarah whispered in Max's ear as he drifted peacefully away. "Thank you for everything. For being my protector, my friend. For leading me to Michael. For teaching us what love really means. And thank you for choosing me all those years ago at the shelter." Later that night, as they looked through photos from their unconventional wedding day, Sarah paused on one that Jenny had captured without them noticing. In it, Sarah and Michael were exchanging their vows, but they weren't looking at each other or the minister. Instead, they were both looking down at Max, who was gazing up at them with pure love in his eyes. "He knew," Sarah said softly, tracing Max's image with her finger. "That day at the church when he wouldn't let me walk down the aisle. He knew he was running out of time, and he wanted to make sure we understood what really mattered." Michael wrapped his arms around her. "He succeeded. Our wedding day wasn't perfect in the traditional sense, but it was perfect for us. Because of Max, we started our marriage focused on what truly matters: love, commitment, and being there for each other no matter what." A year later, Sarah and Michael stood in front of the Riverside Animal Shelter, the same shelter where Sarah had found Max 13 years earlier. They'd spent months grieving Max's loss, but now they felt ready to open their hearts again. "Are you sure about this?" Michael asked gently, squeezing Sarah's hand. Sarah nodded, touching the locket around her neck that contained a small photo of Max. "He taught us so much about love. The best way to honor his memory is to share that love with another dog who needs a home." Inside, they were greeted by the familiar sounds and smells of a shelter. As they walked past the kennels, Sarah couldn't help but remember the day she'd first seen Max. A skinny, scared German Shepherd puppy who'd stolen her heart with one look from those soulful eyes. At the end of one row, they stopped. In the last kennel, a senior golden retriever lay on a worn blanket, gray around the muzzle, watching them with gentle brown eyes. The name card read, "Duke, age 10. Most people want puppies or young dogs," the shelter worker explained, noticing their interest. "Duke's been here for 3 months. His family had to surrender him when they moved into a nursing facility. He's sweet as can be, but his age puts people off." Sarah knelt down by the kennel door. Duke lifted his head, then slowly got to his feet and walked over to her. Through the gate, he pressed his nose against her hand. "He has arthritis in his back legs," the worker continued. "He'll need medication and probably won't be up for long walks. But he's perfect," Sarah interrupted, looking up at Michael with tears in her eyes. Michael nodded, understanding completely. That evening, Duke settled into their home as if he'd always been there. He found Max's old bed by the fireplace and made it his own, though they'd bought him a new one. Perhaps he sensed that this had been another dog's special place and felt honored to carry on the tradition. As Sarah and Michael cuddled on the couch, watching Duke sleep peacefully in Max's old spot, Sarah said, "You know, some people thought we were crazy to adopt a senior dog, knowing we'll have less time with him." Michael smiled, pulling her closer. "But we know better, don't we? Max taught us that it's not about the quantity of time. It's about the quality of love. And thanks to him, we learned that sometimes the most beautiful love stories don't follow the perfect plan." Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, watching as Duke dreamed, his paws twitching slightly. Max's last gift to us wasn't just showing us what mattered on our wedding day. It was teaching us that love is worth any sacrifice, any pain. That's why we can open our hearts to Duke now, even knowing we'll have to say goodbye sooner than we'd like. And look what he's already giving us in return. Michael nodded toward Duke, who had woken up and was gazing at them with pure contentment. He's helping us honor Max's memory by continuing the cycle of love. That night, as they got ready for bed, Duke followed them upstairs and settled into the same spot where Max used to sleep, right next to Sarah's side of the bed. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah could have sworn she felt 2 dogs watching over her. One a presence she could touch, and won a beloved memory that would live in her heart forever. Years later, Sarah and Michael would tell their children the story of their wedding day, not as a tale of plans gone wrong, but as a beautiful lesson about love, loyalty, and what truly matters in life. They would show them the photos of that day at the vet clinic, point out the old German shepherd with the bow tie collar who had changed their lives forever, and explain how sometimes the most precious moments come wrapped in unexpected packages. And through it all, they kept their promise to live the kind of love Max had taught them. Unconditional, unwavering, and always ready to put what matters most ahead of any perfect plans. In their living room, next to their wedding photo, they hung a simple plaque that read, "Sometimes love means changing your perfect plans, for perfection lies not in the path we intended to take, but in the hearts that guide us home." Below it, Max's collar with its tiny bow tie hung alongside Duke's, symbols of the endless capacity of the heart to love, to learn, and to grow, even through loss and change. And on each anniversary, instead of celebrating with fancy dinners or elaborate parties, Sarah and Michael would visit the animal shelter, bringing donations and spending time with the older dogs who, like Duke, were still waiting for someone to see past their gray muzzles to the love they had to give, because that was Max's greatest legacy. Teaching them that love, in all its forms, was worth embracing, worth sacrificing for, and most of all worth sharing, no matter what unexpected forms it might take or how much time you might have together.